Hi folks, my name is Atul Acharya and I am here today to show you how to use Hercules. I am a lawyer, I specialize in appeals, and I wrote Hercules to help me prepare for oral arguments, and I find it immensely useful in that regard. And I decided to put it on the App Store so that other people could make use of it too. So let's dive right in. This is what Hercules looks like when it's fully set up for a case. This is the question screen. I will show you first what it will look like when you create your case. So this is the screen that you will log into when you start up Hercules. A couple of things about Hercules. Hercules is not for, it doesn't replace traditional moots with real people. What it replaces is the John Roberts style, writing down questions on index cards and dealing them out to try to simulate the randomness of an oral argument, practicing your transitions, going from one part of your argument to another part of your argument to answer a question, back into the affirmative argument you were trying to make, practicing answering difficult questions on the fly in different contexts. That's what this replaces. So what you might do with index cards, or maybe just looking at your outline on a computer screen, Hercules will improve that, help you get in the reps so that you look really smooth and polished on argument day. So the first thing that I do when I am preparing for a case, for an argument, is I read all the briefs and I read them with a critical eye to come up with questions that I would ask me if I were the judge on the case. So I read all the briefs, I come up with a list of 40, 50 questions usually per case, depending on how complex it is. I write them down, and then once I've done that, then I go into Hercules and I record the question. So the way you do that is you hit Add Question, and this is the new question screen. Then you hit Record. So suppose you've got a question about the record. I'm just going to something super generic. Counsel, where can we find that fact in the record? Obviously, not a particularly deep question, kind of thing you might get asked in any old case, but that's just here for an example. So what you want to do now that you've recorded the question is you want to tell Hercules what kind of topics might raise that question. So, say, for example, this is a qualified immunity case, and you're arguing that your client didn't even possess a weapon, something like that, say. And the judge says, counsel, where can we find that fact in the record? So you would add weapon as a keyword, or you might add possess, or you might add, innocent, let's say. Just think about what parts of your argument might raise the question that you have presented. And so as you add keywords, you can see they get added here to your added keywords list. And so now they are part of the keywords that are associated with this question. You can also, just so you know, you can re-record the question if you'd like, if you don't like it. You can play it back. Counsel, where can we find that fact in the record? And you can also, if you want, you can edit the text. But that's not super necessary. That's just for your own convenience. If you want it to look nice in the argument run screen, you can fix up the speech transcription, but you don't have to. Okay, so that's one question that you might get asked. Let's say another question. But counsel, isn't it the case that it doesn't matter what your client actually had? It's about what the officer reasonably perceived? Okay, so now you've added this. As you can see, sort of, going with the hypothetical, situation before, this is sort of a follow-on question that you might get asked in the same context. And so here you can add in the old keywords that you added to the last question. So there'll be a list, and you can remove keywords, you can add them back. So there'll be a list here. The second list is keywords that you've added to other questions that you can add to this question. The first list is keywords that you've already added to this question that you can remove if you'd like. Okay, so this is just sort of a toy example, and when you've done this for your case, you will wind up with a question screen that looks something like this. Dozens of questions. You can also go over to the keyword screen and see them organized by keywords. So, for example, one of my keywords is 1981 because this is a qualified immunity case, and so the question is when the law is clearly established, and there are some questions that might get asked based on the case that I'm citing. So this is what your question screen will look like. And just to show you what what a question looks like when it's fully set up. These are all the keywords that I have assigned to this question. So this is a question about whether the defendant had subjective knowledge, an interlocutory appeal, and whether it's a question of fact or question of law. And so topics like subjective and knowledge and no and new and genuine, all of these things are the kind of things for which this question might get asked, that might raise this question. So this is what it looks like once you've entered in your questions, you associate them with keywords, and then you've got your case set up. And then there's just a few other things that you can mess around with. You can allow yourself a certain amount of intro time during which Hercules is guaranteed not to interrupt you. And so here I've set that to 30 seconds. You can set it for anything from 1 to 300. You can also set a range for the amount of time you have to answer a question. So after question here, I've got it set up so that you'll get between 23 and 41 seconds. And you can change that so that it's as much as 5 minutes if you like. But, for this case, I think I liked, somewhere in the 25 to 50 second range. And then bench heat is the final thing to tweak, that you can tweak from run to run. Basically, how hot is your bench? How likely is Hercules to ask you a question, to interrupt you and say, counsel, I don't know what you're talking about, that kind of thing. And then there's this hint section where you can enter in words that are unique to your case. Names of other cases that you might be discussing can often go here, or the names of the parties in your own case could go here. Things that the speech recognition system might not immediately detect. Just see what words Google is and isn't having trouble recognizing, and add them in as you go. But this is something that you would probably tweak only a few times. These things you might tweak from run to run. Okay, and then I'm going to turn the intro time way down just to show you guys how this works. So I go in and I say run. Good morning, Your Honors, and may it please the court. Athula Charya for the plaintiff appellee, Christopher Nazario. This is not a case about COVID-19. This court decided long ago that qualified immunity need not be litigated and relitigated disease by disease. So this is a case about serious infectious disease and what rights inmates have against being exposed to serious infectious disease. And the answer to that question
COVID-19 is literally called the novel coronavirus. Do any of your cases involve containment protocols during a global pandemic? And if not, isn't that enough to say that Thibault gets qualified immunity?
I'll answer those questions in order, Your Honor. First, no, none of our cases involve containment protocols during a global pandemic. But that is not enough for Thibault to get qualified immunity here, because we have known for hundreds of years the germ theory of disease. There are countless diseases that inmates have litigated, both in this court and in the Supreme Court. And the way the Supreme Court put it in Helling was that inmates have a clearly established right against being exposed to serious...
If we decline to overrule the third prong of qualified immunity, does your client lose?
No, Your Honor. My client does not lose because the third prong, which I should stress, very few, if any, other courts of appeals deploy in their qualified immunity analysis. The third prong, whether it would be objectively reasonable, despite clearly established law, for an official to do what Thibault did, is not met here. It would not have been objectively reasonable for a prison administrator to send a healthy inmate to go live among people infected with COVID-19, because any reasonable prison administrator would have known in April 2020 that would expose the inmate to the risk of getting sick. Okay, so that's the basic gist of it. That's how you run it, and you can see, you make your argument, and Hercules will ask you questions relevant to your argument, and then you get a little time to answer. And so these questions are going to be different every time you run. You'll get different questions. Hercules does try to ask you questions relevant to whatever argument you're currently making, but it's not going to ask you the same questions every time. You can see over here on the top left, by the way, there's a little clock to tell you how long you've been arguing. After a run, you can review your argument in this screen, just like a regular old chat screen. You can also, if you want, resume your argument if you had to pause in the middle of it, or you can reset it and start over. So that is it for the basics of how to use Hercules. If you have any questions, you can feel free to get in touch with me here, or my contact information is pretty public on the internet. And yeah, if you've got an argument coming up soon, I hope you'll consider using Hercules. And whenever that argument is, break a leg.